This is my true story. I thought I had found peace when I remarried later in life. I believed my stepwife would bring unity to the family I had built with sacrifice. But instead of love, she brought betrayal. She whispered lies behind my back, mocked me in front of my children, and tried to erase me from my own family. I stayed silent at first, carrying the humiliation like a stone on my chest. But then I discovered her darkest secret, and I decided to expose it. Before I reveal what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. After my first wife passed away, my world became a place of silence. The rooms of the house that once echoed with her laughter and warmth felt empty and hollow, no matter how many lights I turned on or how many family photographs I placed on the walls. For years, I lived like that, eating alone, sleeping alone, and carrying the weight of memories that never seemed to fade. My children grew older, busy with their own lives, and though they visited sometimes, the house never regained its heart. I convinced myself that perhaps this was simply how old age was meant to be, a slow fading into the background. But then she came into my life, and for a brief moment, hope returned. She was kind at first, or at least she knew how to appear kind. She spoke softly, asked about my health, about my memories of my late wife, and pretended to respect the scars and the years I carried. When she laughed, it filled the empty corners of the house with sound again. For a man who had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling alone, that sound was like medicine. I told myself maybe this was God's way of giving me a second chance at companionship, at family, at love. So when she became my wife, I opened my doors, my home, and my heart fully to her. I believed that bringing her into the family would mean healing. I wanted my children to see her as part of us, someone who could add to the unity I had worked so hard to build. I thought she would care for me as I grew older, that she would help ease the burdens of age, and that together we could keep the family steady. I let her step into decisions. I let her hold the keys to the house, and I even shared my savings with her because I trusted her with my future. It wasn't easy to open my heart again, but I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. Every morning when I woke up, I told myself I was lucky. Lucky that after so much loss, I had someone to sit across the table from me. Lucky that I had found a companion who seemed eager to be part of my life. I let myself believe her smile was genuine, that her hands that reached for mine were steady with love, not calculation. I ignored the small doubts, the little cracks in her mask, because I wanted so desperately for the hope to be real. I gave her everything a man could give at that stage in life: trust, loyalty, and access to the legacy I had built over decades. I shared stories of my past. I let her into the private spaces of my life, and I told her of my dreams for the family's future. I wanted her to understand that she wasn't just my wife. She was part of something bigger, the family I had poured sweat and sacrifice into building. I prayed silently that she would treat it with the same respect I had always carried for it. But hope can be blinding. What I saw as love, she saw as opportunity. What I offered as trust, she saw as control to take. Still, in those early days, I didn't know. I held on to the image of a united family, with her sitting by my side, my children respecting her, and peace finally returning to my home. That image was what carried me forward, even though the cracks in her mask would soon grow too wide to ignore. It did not happen all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It seeps in slowly, like water through cracks in a wall, unnoticed at first, but damaging everything it touches. At the beginning, her actions were small, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. But I was looking. I lived with her, and over time, I began to notice how her kindness shifted into something else. It started with whispers. She would lower her voice when speaking to my relatives, leaning in just close enough to make them listen. I couldn't always hear the words, but I could see their reactions. Raised eyebrows, quick glances toward me, awkward silences when I entered the room. Later, I would hear parts of what she had said. "He forgets things now. He's not as sharp as he once was." Maybe it's time someone else took over. At first, I laughed it off, telling myself it was just concern for my health. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. She wasn't caring for me. She was planting seeds. Soon, I noticed changes in how my children looked at me. They had always trusted me with decisions, whether about the house, the land, or family matters. But suddenly, they began hesitating. When I gave advice, they looked uncertain. When I made suggestions, they exchanged glances, as though wondering if I was capable. Their questions stung. "Are you sure, Dad? Do you remember? Maybe we should let her handle this." These weren't the words of children who doubted me naturally. They were echoes of whispers someone else had placed in their minds. Then came the subtle exclusions. Family meetings where I found out decisions had already been made. Conversations that continued when I left the room but changed when I came back. Invitations to relatives' houses where my stepwife was praised while I was treated like an afterthought. It was as if she was slowly pushing me out of my own circle, step by step, smile by smile. And the worst part was how easily people believed her. She painted herself as the new center of the family, the one who cared, the one who knew what was best. I could see it in the way relatives praised her, telling her how strong she was, how patient she was for taking care of me. I sat there, silent, listening to compliments built on lies, my dignity stripped in the very home I had built with my own hands. The betrayal was not just in her words, but in her intentions. She wanted me erased, not physically, but in influence, in respect, in memory. She wanted the family to see her as the leader, the decision-maker, the one who carried the future. And the more she spoke, the more they listened. I began to feel invisible in my own house. The man who had worked decades to provide, who had sacrificed dreams so his children could live better, who had held the family together after the death of his first wife, now reduced to an old man whose opinion didn't matter anymore. I could see it in their eyes, doubt planted where trust once grew. I stayed silent for a long time, carrying the humiliation like a stone inside me. But silence, I realized, only gave her more room to grow her influence. The whispers turned into bolder words. The seeds of doubt grew into weeds of disrespect. And each time she smiled at me across the table, I realized it was not the smile of a wife, but the smile of someone who believed she had already won. Humiliation is a pain sharper than any wound to the body because it doesn't just cut the skin, it carves into the soul. The day it happened, I realized how far she was willing to go to erase me. It was during a family gathering, a day that should have been filled with warmth and unity. Relatives crowded the house, children ran through the halls laughing, and the table was set with food meant to remind everyone of home. For years, I had been the head of these gatherings, the one people looked to for prayers, for blessings, for guidance. But that day, everything changed. We sat at the table, the chatter filling the air like music, when she decided to strike. It began with a simple comment, disguised as concern. "Sometimes he forgets things," she said with a smile, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. The room quieted slightly, the words hanging in the air like a shadow. I felt my stomach tighten, but I stayed silent, hoping she would stop there. But she didn't. She leaned forward, her voice louder this time. "He struggles to remember dates, numbers, even small things. It's hard, keeping everything on track when he's not the same anymore." Laughter rippled through the table. Not loud, not cruel, but nervous, uncomfortable, the kind of laughter people use when they don't know how to respond. My children shifted in their seats, some smiling awkwardly, others avoiding my eyes. I sat there frozen, the words piercing me deeper than I could show. The woman who was supposed to stand beside me had just painted me as weak, forgetful, unfit, and she did it not in whispers, but openly, in front of everyone I loved. Then she delivered the final blow. She placed her hand on the table and said, "Maybe it's time he steps aside and lets me handle things. It's for the best of the family." Those words broke something inside me. To suggest that I, The man who had built this family with sweat and sacrifice should step aside like a broken chair to be discarded. It was a humiliation I could barely breathe through. I looked around the table, hoping someone would defend me, hoping my children would speak up, remind her and everyone else of what I had done for them all these years. But no words came. Some nodded quietly, others avoided looking at me. In their silence, I heard her victory. She had planted doubt so deep that even my own blood no longer saw me as strong. I sat there, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life, as if the chair beneath me was shrinking, as if the walls were pressing in. I wanted to speak, to remind them of who I was, to shout that I was not useless, that my mind was still sharp, that my memory still carried decades of lessons they couldn't even imagine. But the words stuck in my throat. If I spoke, I would sound defensive, desperate. And in that moment, the silence felt like a cage. The humiliation lingered long after the meal ended. I watched her laugh with relatives, acting as though she had simply spoken a harmless truth, while inside me, the shame burned hotter than fire. That night, when everyone left, I sat alone in my room staring at the photographs of the past. Pictures of me holding my children as babies, of me and my first wife smiling proudly, of the house we built together brick by brick. How had it come to this? How had the man who gave everything been reduced to this shadow, mocked in his own home, erased from his own family? But even as the shame weighed on me, something else began to rise inside. Fury. Quiet, controlled, but steady like a flame that would not go out. She thought she had humiliated me beyond return. She thought her words had taken away my dignity. But what she did not know was that humiliation has a way of hardening into resolve. And in that resolve, I began to plan. Sometimes betrayal hides behind smiles, but the truth always leaks out in moments of carelessness. After that humiliating gathering, I began to watch her more closely. I stopped ignoring the cracks. I stopped excusing her behavior, and I started listening with the kind of attention only silence can teach. It was late one night, long after the house had grown quiet, when I discovered what changed everything. I had been sitting awake in my chair, staring at the ceiling, replaying her cruel words in my mind. That was when I heard her voice, soft, tender, not the sharp and mocking tone she used with me, but the kind of voice a woman uses when she wants to be heard by someone she truly desires. I followed the sound down the hall, each step careful, my heart beating louder than my footsteps. The door to the guest room was slightly open, and I could see the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She was smiling in a way I had not seen in months, whispering into the receiver, her words dripping with affection. I froze in the darkness, listening. "I miss you. Tomorrow will be hard. He believes everything. Soon it will just be us." My breath caught in my chest. The way she spoke, the softness, the secrecy. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't casual chatter. It was intimacy. It was an affair. In that moment, everything snapped into focus. The same woman who had been whispering lies to turn my family against me, the same woman who mocked me and tried to erase me, was hiding her own betrayal. She was not only unfaithful to me as a wife, but she was unfaithful to the family she pretended to protect. And suddenly, her strategy became clear. She wanted me erased, not just to take my place, but to cover her own sins. If the family saw me as weak, then her strength would never be questioned. If I was painted as unfit, no one would look closely at her actions. She was building her power on the foundation of my silence. I stood there for a long time, frozen in the shadows, letting the words pierce me over and over. At first I felt crushed, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath my feet. But slowly, another feeling rose to the surface. Not despair, not humiliation, fury, quiet, steady, controlled. She thought she had stripped me of everything, but in her arrogance, she had given me the one thing she never intended: the truth. I returned to my room, my body trembling, my mind racing. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made for this family, of the legacy I had built with my first wife, of the children who had begun to doubt me because of her lies. And then I thought of her laughter with that man on the phone, of the betrayal she thought was hidden, and I realized something with absolute clarity. I could not let this go. I could not remain silent any longer. For too long I had been humiliated quietly, swallowing my pain so the family would not break. But now I understood. The family was already breaking, not because of me, but because of her. She was the rot at the center, poisoning everything from within. And if I allowed her to continue, then the legacy I had built with sweat and sacrifice would be destroyed completely. That night, sitting in the silence of my room, I made a decision. I would not fight her with whispers. I would not beg my children to believe me with words alone. I would use the very thing she had overlooked: proof. She had tried to erase me with lies, but I would bring her down with truth. The night I overheard her whispers, I realized fury alone would not be enough. Words can be denied. Accusations can be twisted. But proof, cold, undeniable proof, was something she could never escape. If I wanted to expose her betrayal, if I wanted my family to finally see the truth, I had to gather evidence strong enough to break through every lie she had planted. So I began the work in silence. It started with her phone. She guarded it carefully, clutching it like a lifeline, never letting it out of her sight. But even the most careful liars make mistakes. One morning, she left it charging on the table while she went to the garden. My heart raced as I picked it up, my hands trembling not from age, but from anger. I scrolled quickly, every second feeling like a stolen breath. And there it was. Messages, dozens of them, written late at night. Promises of secret meetings, words of longing, plans disguised as errands and appointments. I snapped photographs of the screen with my own phone, each image burning into my memory. But I knew texts alone might not convince everyone. I needed more. So I looked at phone bills, pretending I was checking household expenses. Long, late-night calls to the same number, week after week. The pattern was clear. She wasn't speaking to a friend or relative. She was speaking to him. I folded the bill carefully, sliding it into a drawer where she would never look. Another piece of proof, another brick in the wall I was building against her. Then came the receipts. She often claimed she was going out shopping for groceries or meeting relatives. But when she returned, the bags were too light, the excuses too flimsy. So when she left her purse unattended one evening, I checked. Inside were crumpled papers, receipts from restaurants I had never been to, hotels I had never stayed in, and even gifts I had never received. My chest tightened as I read the dates. They lined up perfectly with the nights she had claimed to be busy elsewhere. I gathered them all, smoothing them flat, each one a nail sealing her coffin of lies. Still, I wasn't done. I needed witnesses. I began asking quiet questions, not directly, but in ways that sounded harmless. I asked a taxi driver I knew if he had seen her late at night. He nodded slowly and said he had driven her several times, always dropping her at the same hotel across town. My jaw tightened, but I thanked him without letting my voice shake. I asked a neighbor if she had noticed anything. She hesitated, then admitted she had seen my wife entering a car with someone who wasn't me. Each word was like fire in my ears, but I stayed calm, storing it away. Proof. More proof. I organized everything carefully. Screenshots from her phone, copies of phone bills, receipts from hotels and restaurants, notes about witness accounts. I placed them all into a folder, each page a dagger that would cut through the false image she had built. For days, I carried that folder in my hands, opening it late at night, reviewing every detail. With each document I touched, the humiliation I had once felt turned into strength. She had tried to erase me, but now I held the power to erase her mask. The same influence she used against me, her whispers, her lies, her manipulations, I would now counter with truth. She had mocked me for being forgetful, but I had remembered everything. She had painted me as weak, but I had gathered the tools of strength. Every piece of evidence was a reminder that she underestimated me. She thought old age meant blindness. But what she never understood is that years give you patience, and patience gives you the power to see what others miss. When I closed the folder and set it on my desk, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: control. The betrayal still burned, the humiliation still ached, but now I carried a weapon stronger than her deceit: proof. And soon, everyone would see it. Once the folder was complete, once every receipt, every message, and every bill was tucked neatly inside, I knew I was ready. But even then, I understood this wasn't something to be rushed. Timing mattered. The same way she had slowly poisoned the family against me with whispers and staged concern, I needed to strike at a moment where silence would not save her, where excuses would not protect her. I could not expose her in a private room where she could deny everything. No. The truth had to be revealed in front of everyone, in the same place she had chosen to humiliate me. So I waited. I went about my days quietly, letting her believe she had already won. I let her mock me with her sweet smiles. I let her tell my children that I was slipping. I let her continue her little games of power, sitting at the head of conversations and making decisions as if she carried the weight of the family name. She thought my silence meant defeat. But really, it was patience. Every time she smirked at me across the table, I told myself, "Your time is coming." The perfect opportunity came soon after. Another family gathering. She thrived at those moments, standing tall with her words sharp and her voice confident, using the presence of others to cement her influence. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist showing off again, reminding everyone that she was the one taking care of everything. That would be my stage, my moment, and when it came, the evidence would do the speaking for me. The days before the gathering felt long, but I spent them preparing myself. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, and most importantly, how I would stay calm. Rage would make me look desperate. Sadness would make me look weak. But calmness would make the truth undeniable. I practiced my line again and again, whispering it to myself at night until it became carved into my tongue. If I am unfit to be part of this family, perhaps they should know who you really are. I placed the folder into a leather case, something ordinary, something no one would notice. To the rest of the family, I would look like an old man carrying his papers, maybe notes for a speech. To me, it was armor. Each page inside was a shield against her lies, a weapon sharper than any insult she could hurl. On the morning of the gathering, I dressed carefully. Not in new clothes, not in anything flashy, but in the same suit I had worn during my most important milestones. It reminded me of who I was before her whispers, before her mockery: a husband, a father, a man who had built a family with sweat, blood, and sacrifice. I looked in the mirror at my lined face, my tired eyes, and I told myself, "Today, you take back your dignity." When we arrived at the gathering, she was in her element, smiling, laughing, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. She basked in the attention, like a performer on a stage. I sat quietly at first, watching, waiting, letting her speak, letting her show herself. She began again with the same tune. "He forgets things. He's not strong enough to handle decisions. I make sure everything stays in order." Her voice carried easily, and I could see some of the family nodding, half believing her words. That was when I placed the case on the table. The sound of it landing on the wood made her pause, her eyes flicking toward me. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of unease. I leaned forward, rested my hand on the folder inside, and let my voice cut through the room, calm and steady. "If I am unfit to be part of this family, perhaps they should know who you really are." The silence that followed was heavy. Every face turned toward me. She laughed nervously, tried to dismiss it, but I opened the folder and began to slide the documents across the table. One by one: hotel receipts, phone bills, printed messages, witness notes. Every piece of proof laid bare under the light, undeniable, unshakable. The whispers stopped. The laughter stopped. And for the first time, she had no words. The room fell into a silence so sharp It felt like the air itself had turned solid. Every eye in the gathering was fixed on me. The man they had been told was too old, too weak, too forgetful to matter. My stepwife's laughter faltered the moment I laid the first document on the table. Her confident smile, the one she always used when she had the family wrapped around her finger, began to tremble at the edges. She tried to brush it off with a scoff, saying, "What's this nonsense now?" But her voice was thinner, less certain. For the first time, she was not in control. I did not answer her directly. Instead, I let the papers speak. I slid the phone bill across to one of my sons, the one who had begun to doubt me most. His eyes scanned the page, his brow furrowing as he saw the repeated number that filled the call log, late at night, every week. "That's not possible," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I watched the doubt crawl across his face, the kind of doubt that could no longer be ignored. Next came the receipts. Restaurants she had claimed were grocery stores. Hotels she had claimed were errands. I placed them slowly, one by one, on the table in front of her. The room shifted with unease as relatives leaned forward, reading the details for themselves. The dates, the times, the amounts. All of it painted a picture too clear to deny. She reached out, snatching one of the papers, crumpling it in her fist, her cheeks flushed red. "These are lies!" she shouted, but her trembling hands betrayed her. I stayed calm, steady, my voice level. "If these are lies, then explain them. Explain why your phone bills show the same number for hours every night. Explain why these receipts don't match the errands you claimed. Explain why neighbors saw you stepping into another man's car." I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than any shout. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for someone to defend her, someone to echo her lies the way they once echoed her whispers about me. But no one spoke. Not a single relative dared to meet her gaze with support. Instead, I saw wide eyes, shaking heads, whispered prayers. The same people who once doubted me were now doubting her, and she could feel it. One of my daughters finally broke the silence. She looked at her stepmother and asked quietly, "Is it true?" The question hung heavy in the air. My stepwife opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to force a laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. He's trying to turn you all against me." But her words lacked the confidence they once carried. She looked small, cornered, desperate. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out the printed messages. Screenshots of her conversations, her words in black and white, promises of love to another man, plans to leave once she had secured control over the family. I placed them at the center of the table. Gasps filled the room as my children leaned forward, their faces pale as they read the sentences that shattered whatever illusions remained. And then it happened, the exposure I had waited for. My son slammed his hand on the table, his face twisted with anger. "All this time, you made us believe our father was weak. All this time, you poisoned us against him. And this is who you really are?" His voice cracked, half fury, half heartbreak. My stepwife reached out toward him, pleading, but he pushed her hand away. The walls she had built with lies crumbled in a single moment, and there was no place for her to hide. The family erupted. Not in chaos, but in voices filled with shock, betrayal, and anger. Cousins muttered to one another, uncles shook their heads in disgust, and my daughters cried quietly, realizing how they had been misled. For months, she had stood on a pedestal, feeding them lies about me, convincing them I was unfit, only to be revealed as the one who had betrayed everything. The silence that once worked in her favor now worked against her. She tried one last time to speak, her voice desperate, her eyes wild. "You don't understand. He's twisting this. He's making it look worse than it is." But no one believed her anymore. The evidence was too heavy, too undeniable. Her power was gone. And in that moment, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth that had finally stripped her mask away. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, but my face calm. I didn't need to say more. The truth was laid out in front of them, undeniable, unshakable. The woman who tried to erase me had been erased herself, not by lies, but by her own actions finally revealed. The fallout from that moment spread through the room like fire racing across dry grass. For months, she had strutted with confidence, speaking loudly, mocking me quietly, and twisting my children's trust like clay in her hands. But now, all of that power vanished in an instant. The air was thick with shock, the sound of paper rustling as relatives passed the evidence from hand to hand, each one reading, each one seeing her mask torn away. I watched their faces change, disbelief, then anger, then a deep kind of disappointment that no words could soften. No one looked at me with pity anymore. For too long, they had stared at me with doubt in their eyes, wondering if I truly was the weak man she made me out to be. Now their eyes turned toward her, sharp and questioning. My children, who had begun to side with her, sat stunned, unable to lift their heads. One by one, the lies they had believed unraveled before them. I could see the guilt rise in their faces, the shame of realizing how easily they had been fooled, how quickly they had abandoned me for her empty words. She stood at the center of it all, trembling, clutching the crumpled paper in her fist, her eyes darting desperately for someone, anyone, to defend her. But no defense came. Relatives who once praised her charm now turned their backs. Friends who once laughed at her jokes now whispered about her betrayal. And my children, the ones she had worked hardest to manipulate, were silent, their silence louder than any accusation. Finally, one of my sons broke the stillness. His voice shook as he turned to her and said, "You told us he was weak. You made us believe our father was nothing. And all this time, you were lying to us while lying with someone else." His words landed heavy, each syllable cutting through the fragile web she had tried to hold together. She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out except a broken stammer. The truth had stolen her voice. Then came the anger. Not from me, I had already said what needed to be said, but from those who once trusted her. My daughters cried openly, their tears falling not just for me, but for themselves, for the shame of realizing they had doubted their own father. An uncle stood up and shook his head, saying loudly, "How dare you treat him this way, after everything he has done for this family?" His voice echoed, and for the first time in months, I felt the room lean toward me, not away. She tried to lash out, pointing a finger at me with fury in her voice. "This is his doing. He wants to destroy me. He's jealous because I made this family stronger." Her words fell flat, no longer convincing, no longer sharp. My children shook their heads, the evidence too clear for her desperate denials. Her lies had worked in shadows, but now, under the light of truth, they crumbled like ash. The gathering, meant to be another stage for her performance, had turned into her downfall. People began to leave, shaking their heads in disgust. Some refused to look at her as they walked past, muttering prayers under their breath, asking how a woman could deceive so deeply. My children stayed, their silence heavy, their eyes refusing to meet mine at first, but I could see it in their faces, the guilt, the regret, the slow realization that they had turned away from the man who raised them and placed their trust in the woman who betrayed them all. And there she was, left standing alone, her pride shattered, her lies scattered across the table for all to see. She tried to gather the papers, to hide them, but no one let her. My son pulled them back, slammed them down in front of her, and said, "No, everyone needs to see this." The fury in his voice was not just for me, but for himself, for being deceived, for being used. As I sat there, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not joy, not pride, but peace. The humiliation I had endured, the whispers I had swallowed, the shame of being mocked in front of my own family. All of it was answered in that moment. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to curse her. The truth had done the work for me. The fallout left her exposed, not just as a liar, but as the very thing she had accused me of being: unfit to lead, unworthy of trust, undeserving of respect. And in that exposure, I reclaimed what she had tried to steal: my dignity, my place in the family, my honor as the man who built the life they were standing in. The aftermath of her exposure did not fade with the closing of that family gathering. It followed us like a shadow that refused to lift, hanging heavy in the air of the house and echoing in the voices of relatives long after they left. In the days that followed, I watched the fallout ripple through every part of our lives. My stepwife, once so loud and confident, moved through the halls like a ghost. Her laughter, the sound she used to charm everyone, was gone. Her eyes darted nervously whenever she crossed my path, and the defiance she once wore so proudly had been replaced with fear and bitterness. For the first time since I had married her, the house was quiet in a way that gave me peace. She no longer dared to mock me openly, no longer whispered to relatives about my forgetfulness, no longer tried to take my place at the head of the table. She avoided gatherings, avoided conversations, avoided even the smallest interactions with those who had once looked at her with admiration. The walls that she had built to elevate herself had collapsed completely, and now she walked among the ruins, exposed for who she truly was. Relatives called often, but this time their voices were different. Instead of questioning me, they apologized. They told me they regretted believing her lies, regretted doubting the man who had sacrificed everything for his family. Some spoke with guilt in their voices, admitting they had laughed along when she mocked me, admitting they had turned a blind eye to her cruelty because it was easier than standing up against her. Their apologies did not erase the pain of what I had endured, but they reminded me of something she had almost made me forget. Respect can be stolen for a while, but truth always brings it back. My children were the ones who struggled most in the aftermath. They had been closest to her, most poisoned by her whispers, most blind to her deceit. Now they avoided my eyes, shame written across their faces. I did not lash out at them. I did not scold them for abandoning me when I needed them most. I let the silence do the work. And in that silence, they began to realize what it meant to doubt their father, what it meant to let lies take root where trust should have lived. Slowly, they began to come back to me. Not with words at first, but with small gestures. A hand on my shoulder, a quiet meal shared, a lingering presence in the room instead of walking past me. It wasn't forgiveness they were asking for. It was redemption. And as for her, she could not escape the eyes of the community. The story of her affair spread quickly, whispered in markets, in churches, in homes. People who once admired her began to cross the street to avoid her. Invitations stopped coming. The friends she boasted about vanished like smoke. Even her own relatives, embarrassed by her betrayal, stopped defending her. The woman who had tried to erase me from my family had erased herself from her place in the community. Her shame was public, her mask gone forever. I lived those days with a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. Sorrow, because no man wants to see his home torn apart by betrayal. Satisfaction, because I had not needed to shout, not needed to fight. I had simply laid down the truth and let it do what it always does. Reveal. For years, she had made me feel small, weak, forgotten. Now it was she who shrank in the shadows, and I who walked with my head high again. The aftermath also brought me clarity. I realized I had been holding on to her out of fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of silence, fear of old age without companionship. But in truth, loneliness with dignity is far better than companionship with betrayal. The quiet of my home, without her poisonous words filling the air, became a blessing. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I began to reclaim my place slowly. At family gatherings, I no longer sat quietly in the corner. I spoke, I gave advice, I blessed meals. And this time, my children listened. They leaned in again, their eyes on me, no longer clouded by her whispers. The respect that had been stolen from me returned piece by piece, not because I demanded it, but because the truth had restored it. As for her, she lived in the same house, but it was no longer her kingdom. It was a place she moved through quietly, each step heavy with the weight of her disgrace. She had tried to erase me, but in the end, she erased herself. That was the true aftermath, the shifting of power, not by force, but by exposure. Justice, I learned, does not always come with noise or with the applause of others. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the calm way a storm clears the sky after tearing through everything in its path. For months, I had carried humiliation in my chest like a stone, watching her twist my family against me, watching my children doubt the father who had raised them. I had felt powerless, as though old age had stripped me of every weapon. But the day I laid out the truth, the day her mask slipped for everyone to see, I understood that justice doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from standing firm when the truth is finally on your side. My justice was not in shouting at her. It was not in cursing her name or throwing her out of the house. My justice was in exposing her lies to the very people she had deceived. She tried to erase me from the family by painting me as weak, but in the end, she erased herself by proving she was unworthy of the trust she stole. The family that once looked at me with doubt now looked at her with disgust. The community that once praised her charm now whispered about her betrayal. She lost everything she had fought for, not because I raised my voice, but because I raised the evidence she thought I would never find. And yet, I did not feel triumphant. Sitting in my chair after the storm, I felt something deeper: peace. I did not need revenge. I did not need to see her ruined completely. I had already won when I reclaimed my dignity, when my children realized who I truly was, when the family I had built returned to me with respect instead of suspicion. That was my justice, not her downfall, but my restoration. In the weeks that followed, I saw the change in my children most of all. They no longer whispered with her behind closed doors. They no longer looked at me as though I was fading. Instead, they came to me for advice, for guidance, for blessings. They sat with me in the evenings, asking me to tell stories of the past, reminding themselves of the man who had sacrificed everything for them. I did not need to lecture them about their mistakes. The truth had already taught them the lesson far better than I ever could. She, on the other hand, lived in the shadows of her own making. She moved quietly through the house, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. The woman who once mocked me at the dinner table now sat silently, her presence barely noticeable. She had been stripped of the power she craved most: influence. That was the greatest justice of all, to watch her shrink in the silence she once tried to trap me in. I began to reclaim small pieces of my life. I walked into gatherings without fear. I spoke without worrying if my words would be twisted. I sat at the head of the table again, not with arrogance, but with the calm strength of someone who has endured humiliation and risen above it. I no longer questioned my worth. I no longer let her whispers echo in my mind. The truth had silenced them forever. Justice also came in the way others treated me. Relatives who once looked at me with pity now greeted me with respect. Neighbors who had believed her lies now avoided her and smiled at me instead. Even in the marketplace, I felt the shift. People nodding at me, acknowledging me, treating me as the man I had always been, not the shadow she tried to create. She could not escape that. Every step she took outside the house was a reminder that the world now saw her for what she truly was. In the quiet of my room at night, I often thought of my first wife. I imagined her looking down, watching the chaos that had unfolded, and I hoped she would understand why I did what I did. I had not exposed my stepwife out of cruelty. I had exposed her because I could not let lies destroy the family I had built with the woman I first loved. That was the final layer of justice for me, to know that I had defended not just myself, but the legacy of the woman who stood by me through the hardest years of my life. Now, as I grow older, I no longer fear being erased. My story has been told, my truth has been proven, and the family knows who I am. She may still live under the same roof, but she lives in silence, while I live in dignity. That is the difference between us now. My final thought: she tried to erase me. Instead, I erased her mask, and the family saw everything.